Engineering Technology te enseña a conocer la industria, a la manufactura. Entonces, al final de la carrera, tú sales conociendo lo que es la industria, paso a paso, desde que empieza un pedido hasta que tú se le entregas en la mano a un cliente. Y yo me senté cuando llegué aquí, yo dije, esto parece imposible, pero me empuja el yo saber que voy a poderle dar un mejor futuro a mis hijos. Porque si yo trabajo en una fast food, no voy a ganar ni la mitad de lo que pueda ganar con un asociado de un college. Esto es un robot industrial. Es una mano de robot donde tú tienes que aprender cómo programarlo para que él te agarre algo y te lo coloque en otro sitio. Mi desafío más grande todavía en la carrera ha sido el inglés. Lo que regularmente un estudiante le tomaría 2 horas, a mí me toma 4 y 5. Porque primero viene el traducir y todo eso y entender los conceptos en inglés. Y pues se hace un poco desafiante para mí. En la escuela igual hablo inglés, en todas mis clases hablo inglés, pero afortunadamente tengo mi maestro que habla español. Y cuando tengo una duda, él me empuja que todo sea en inglés y que trate de aprender todas las cosas en inglés. Pero cuando ya me ven esos trancones ahí que no puedo dar ni para adelante ni para atrás, entonces él sale a mi socorro. Yo soy madre de 3 adolescentes, Abigail, Radames y Abraham. Y hasta ahora están sumamente contentos y orgullosos de los logros que hasta aquí he obtenido.
Ella puede salir adelante con lo que ella quiera y también nos ayuda a nosotros a salir adelante con lo que nosotros queremos en nuestra vida.
Yo tengo que salir hacia adelante por mis hijos, por lo tanto tengo que sacrificar el tiempo que antes estaba con ellos, estaba a tiempo completo con ellos. Ahora tengo que utilizar mi tiempo con más sabiduría.
Vale la pena y porque en el futuro vamos a tener un futuro mejor si ella logra esta meta.
Yo me siento muy orgullosa porque yo puedo estudiar con mi mamá y aprender lo que ella está aprendiendo.
Prácticamente han sido mi inspiración, porque en vez de que me resten, son los que me empujan. Cuando tú tienes personas, hijos sobre todo, que te están mirando a ti como ejemplo, entonces tú no te puedes dar el lujo de fallar. Me veo ya con mi maestría, porque no pienso parar. Quiero tener un buen trabajo, quiero seguir aprendiendo. Cada vez que tenga la oportunidad de sacar un certificado, pienso hacerlo, ya que este es un área bien cambiante porque se mantiene avanzando y es una de las cosas que me gustan. Yo no soy de las que me puedo sentar a hacer lo mismo todos los días. Si nosotros queremos seguir hacia adelante, si nosotros queremos hacer la diferencia en este mundo, simplemente tenemos que salir a tocar puertas y muchas puertas se van a cerrar. Pero solamente necesitamos una sola que se nos abra. Y si una puerta se nos abrió, entra por ahí y coge camino.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 24th ATE Principal Investigator Conference. It's great to see everyone, although it's kind of hard to see with these lights. But I know you're all out there, so welcome. I'm going to try and keep my remarks pretty short because our speaker this evening does have a flight to catch, but I just wanted to say welcome. I wanted to particularly, I always like to do this, acknowledge that we've got a record number of students attending this year, so maybe we can give them all a hand. And I would also like to acknowledge that the steering committee that works on this conference is crucial to what you are going to experience for the next few days, and that this conference would not happen without our partnership with the American Association of Community Colleges. And with that just very, very short introduction, I would like to ask Dr. Walter Bumpus to come up from the American Association of Community Colleges and provide his welcoming remarks. And it's just always a pleasure. I know Walter said he sees me so frequently, sometimes he thinks I work at AACC. But
Good afternoon, everyone, and given what Dr. Carter just said about our guest speaker, I won't take long either. But I want to join Celeste in welcoming all of you here and just making a few brief remarks. First of all, I want to bring greetings to you on behalf of our 1,100 colleges and our 13 million students. We really can't say how proud we are of this partnership, this relationship. I was researching it today. I think we've got about 80 plus partnerships that are major partnerships like this one. No finer partnership than this one, though. My staff have heard me say that this represents the best of our students. And I want to not brag, but share with you a minute about what I've been doing all day. I have been at the White House since 7:30 this morning. And then we left there and went over to the Vice President's home, Vice President Biden and Dr. Jill Biden. And then we went back to the White House for a few minutes. But believe it or not, we started the morning talking about STEM-related fields, talking about community college students going into STEM-related jobs and so forth. And everyone from the president on down was so complimentary of the work community colleges are doing. So I want to salute you. How about a hand for all the folks in the room doing that? I understand that we also have 67 ATE students attending this conference from all over the U.S. Would the ATE students please stand and be recognized if you're in the room? Salute to you. Thank you. Thank you. And of course, I want to just thank all 800 of you in the audience for being here today. Nothing more important than the work you're doing. These have been really great times for community colleges, and we get lots of accolades about the wonderful work that many of our colleges are doing, sending people to college and then on to four-year schools at an affordable rate of tuition, sending people into the workforce, work-ready. And I can't tell you how pleased we are with this partnership. I'd be remiss if I didn't also, once again, thank Dr. Carter and all the members of the NSF team for the great work you do with us. I always say Celeste feels like a part of our team now. But Celeste, how about a hand for Celeste Carter? And I also, again, would be major remiss and probably get beat up when I got back to the ranch if I didn't also recognize the outstanding job of Ellen House and her team, Ken Laria and everybody else. Ellen, where's Ellen? Oh, there she is over there. Ellen, thank you. Mary Heiss, thank you. Last, I just want to acknowledge all of the STEM leaders in the room and continue to say that we want to continue to focus our efforts, our strategic planning on moving further in this partnership, doing more with STEM-related activities. And I just want to, again, welcome you to DC. And I had something happen to me tonight that I used to tell my students when I've been a college president 3 or 4 times, but probably the job I liked most before getting to this job was as a professor at the University of Texas at Austin. And, all right, hook 'em if that's what you said, I'll say that. But I taught students that were preparing to be college presidents, and one of the things I used to always tell them, if you're on time, you're late, and never be late for anything. And I walked in this door a couple minutes late tonight, so I apologize for that. But folks, have a wonderful conference, and thank you for being here.
I'm not going to try to dance to that. Good evening. I sense an enormous amount of enthusiasm here. It's really, really terrific. My name is Lee Zia. I'm the acting division director for the NSF Division of Undergraduate Education. I've been thinking a lot about the Constitution recently. In particular, the part in the preamble that goes between the we the people part and the do, ordain, and establish part. And in the middle are a set of things the founders wanted to do. And I'm going to call out 3 in particular. Ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare. So if you fast forward to 1950, which is when NSF came into being, those 3 goals turn out to form the essence of the NSF mission in the NSF Organic Act. So that act has a small preamble, and it opens with several infinitive phrases. To promote the progress of science, to advance the national health, prosperity, and welfare, to secure the national defense. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Isn't that cool? Now, the 2016 version of this original language is that NSF invests in projects that improve the economy, bolster the defense, and bolster security, and drive innovation to ensure U.S. global leadership. And I bring all this up here because as a whole, the ATE program, in my mind, comes as close collectively as any that I know in meeting those three goals, with education clearly forming the foundation to reach them. So at NSF, the Directorate for Education and Human Resources, or EHR, sits squarely at the center of the agency's overall research and development efforts in STEM education, of which ATE is a key component. Moreover, EHR provides leadership across the federal government in executing the administration's priorities for STEM education. And no one has done more to advance this cause, in my view, than our NSF Assistant Director for EHR. Thus, I'm very, very, very pleased to introduce a great colleague of many years, Joan Farini-Mundy, who will offer some welcoming remarks.
Good evening, everyone. You can say good evening back. And welcome. We do have this habit of serial welcomes, but that's because we all want the chance to say hello to you, to thank you for the great work that you do, to tell you repeatedly how central the ATE program is to our programming in the Education and Human Resources Directorate and at the National Science Foundation generally. So I'll just be very brief. As we've already heard from our wonderful partners at AACC, the number of students in the nation's community colleges is growing quickly. Just about half of all undergraduates who are undergraduates, as you well know, are in community colleges. The institutions that you represent are at the center of our education system and at the center of our STEM system for moving our nation forward with all that eloquence that Lee was able to relate to us about concerning the mission of the National Science Foundation. So we are about advancing the progress of science, and we're about making sure that the nation has the people and the experts and the technologists who will do that work. Our agency has just announced a set of 10 big ideas, and I'm going to mention just 2 of them because they're so relevant to the work that you do. These are areas of expected focus for the NSF over the coming decades. And so one of them is titled Work at the Human Technology Frontier, essentially shaping the future. And so as we at NSF begin to figure out how we will hope to grow our investments in that domain and thinking about what will the world of work look like going forward, I can think of no better program to be right in the middle of this discussion than ATE. With the expertise that you have, the partnerships that you have among your university, among your colleges and your industry partners, the students who are at the center of the work now will be tomorrow's leaders and innovators. And so we look to the ATE program as we move forward in our work at the human technology frontier. The other big idea is NSF Includes. I'm interested in how many of you are connected with an NSF Includes launch pilot at this time. Anybody in the audience connected with those? Okay, well, watch for that. There will be another round of announcements coming for those pilots for next year. And what we're interested in is networks of organizations that are particularly committed to inclusion and broadening participation for STEM in the workforce, in education, and across academia. So stay tuned for STEM NSF Includes, because I think the ATE networks can be critical partners for that. Again, thank you to all of you for the great work that you do, for what you're learning and teaching all of us about how to improve the preparation of folks who will be central in the STEM workforce. Thank you to all of our NSF program team, past and present, who are here tonight to hear about the good work that you're doing and to hear through the meeting. And also, of course, thanks again to AACC. Have a wonderful conference.
Thank you. Boy, you're right, Celeste. This is bright. I want to give a shout out to the folks that have developed the ATE app so I can look up our speaker's biography tonight. My name's Dave Campbell. I'm co-lead of the ATE program along with Celeste. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Andreas Schleicher. Andreas is the Director of Education and Skills and Special Advisor on Education Policy to the Secretary General at the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD. But a lot of us know it because of some of the things that the Directorate does. For instance, the work of the Directorate includes the PISA, the Program for International Student Assessment. It also does the PIAAC, which some of you may know about, the OECD Survey of Adult Skills, the OECD Teaching and Learning International Survey, TALIS, and the Development and Analysis and Benchmarks of the Performance of Education Systems, the INES. I had the pleasure of meeting Andreas a couple of years ago in 2011. He might not remember, but he collaborated with one of our NSF-funded programs for an NSF-funded award to the National Association of Environmental Education with Karen Holwig for developing a framework for environmental literacy assessments. So he's had this long history of collaboration with some of our NSF works. So Lee mentioned a little while ago about, NSF wants to be a global leader, but you can't be a global leader without being a global partner and having a lot of partners with other global institutions. So tonight, Andreas will give us a great perspective on international education. Thank you, Andreas.
Thanks so much. It's such a privilege to share this session with you. Community colleges, the kind of tertiary education, is the fastest growing sector of tertiary education on a worldwide scale. And at the very same time, with great employment prospects, but at the very same time, it's also important there's a lot of work to do to make sure that the skills acquired are actually properly recognized and translate into the wages that people deserve. And I want to lead you through some of the international experiences in this. The first thing, of course, everybody knows is about that skills matter for people. And I've brought some data from our survey of adult skills with me here. You can see, for example, the likelihood to be employed doubles if you get to the top end of the skill spectrum versus just having baseline skills. Wages. But it doesn't end with money. You can see actually that those skills are a very strong predictor for the health of people with their propensity to volunteer. People at the high end of the skill spectrum see themselves as actors in societies and political processes. People at the low end do not see themselves having a role. And even trust in our society, sort of the glue of democracies, is actually very, very closely related to the skills that people have. So this is not just an economic agenda, it's a social agenda as well. Productivity. The best predictor for productivity is the skills that people have and how they actually deploy and use those skills. And the United States is a great example in this. Relationship isn't perfect, but it is very, very strong. And at the very same time, we need to keep in mind that degrees do not automatically translate into better skills, better jobs, and better life. In fact, one of the biggest surprises from our survey of adult skills was how loose the link between degrees and skills actually is. I think this is a particularly important message for the sector of community colleges, becoming better at recognizing people's skills, certifying them so that people don't only get them for their current job, but for the next job. So let's keep that in mind. And it's really I want to talk about 3 dimensions here. The first is, ensuring that people get the right skills, developing the right skills, making sure that people who have those skills actually use them. And you'll see it's not trivial. And finally, putting skills to effective use. This is basically about supply and demand. And this is where sort of the sector of community colleges is so important, because that is the sector that is close to the skill use, close to labor demand. This is where much of the innovation actually happens. Let me go through this in a bit more detail. You might have seen this picture of a magazine called The Economist a couple of years ago. What today's technology is doing to tomorrow's jobs. Maybe not at their speed, but we all know about this. And it has to do, with robots taking over whole factories. That's one part of the story.
You can have a car driving through Washington without a driver, without human intervention, are probably safer than people driving cars. So this is the kind of world in which we live in today. Think about augmented reality. You can bring the world's most advanced knowledge in real time into what you do right now. And that means the world no longer rewards us just for what we know. No? Google knows everything. The world rewards us for what we can do with what we know. That is becoming the big differentiator. And you can see that in earnings and employment data already. And there's a lot more to come. I don't have the time to talk about this. I just want to sort of highlight one thing here. Is we always talk about the digital economy. But the digital economy is the economy these days. People complain about declining productivity. Now you look at sort of the period in the early 2000s, we saw a lot of GDP growth per capita. Nowadays it's become less. And this is not because people no longer work as hard. In fact, the light blue bar has become longer. People actually do work harder now than they did in the 2000s. But the red bar has shrunk. And that's the productivity. That is the challenge that we're confronting today. But don't get sort of so disappointed by looking at this, because it varies hugely by sectors. If you work in one of the frontier firms, the firms that actually lead innovation, actually you see still steeply rising productivity. Those companies actually continue to make more and more money per worker. But if you work in one of the laggard firms, that have not, that are no longer at the technology frontier, this is where we see not only modestly rising, but declining productivity. And that's true for the manufacturing sector, that's true for the servicing. That is why the skills agenda is so crucially important. It's about being at the frontier. It's about, adding value in the most advanced fields. Otherwise, you face the specter of declining labor productivity. Some people say, well, before the Industrial Revolution, neither skills nor technology mattered much for the vast majority of people. But then, the Industrial Revolution put technology ahead of people. And actually, today we look at the miracles of the Industrial Revolution. You wouldn't have wanted to live in those times. Actually, for most people, that meant enormous social pain. There were no social welfare systems, and people who were not equipped for this industrial society really paid an enormous price for this. But then, we invented universal public schooling that put people ahead of technology, and actually that generated a huge amount of prosperity. But, we became a bit complacent, and you can see that in the United States as well. Education has become more expensive, but not really that much better over the last 50 years. And actually today we face a digital revolution that is doing exactly the same thing to people. Putting technology ahead of people. And you can see that, when we talk about jobless growth, all of those kinds of phenomena, this is very much about people not having the right skills to capture the opportunities that technology provides. So getting that right, moving people up, is really the part that is so important. So how well are people prepared? One of the things that we measured in our survey of adult skills is the capacity of people to solve problems in a technology-rich world. And this is the share of older adults, 55 to 65-year-olds, who are reasonably good at this. And I'm not talking about people, with advanced technology skills, really people who are good users, problem solvers with technology. And you can see actually, if you're lucky, like in the United States, this is one of the best performers, you talk about 1 in 5 people. For most of the people, those skills are lacking. And now you tell me, well, we all know the problem. This is older people not keeping up with technology. If you look at this among young people, it's going to be a lot different. And that is true. When you look at the same kind of skills among young people, things do look better. But you're still only talking on average across countries about half of today's young people who are equipped for today's technology. And I'm not talking about tomorrow's technology. Huge skill deficit. And you can look, for example, if you look at the United States, actually, it used to be number 2 or number one, very close to the frontier. If you look among the young generation, lots of other countries have grown a lot faster in equipping young people with those digital skills. And Singapore and Korea are a good example at the top. You know, the older generation, you know, very poorly equipped, very poorly skilled. It's hard to imagine, but you know, in the 1960s, Korea had the level of economic development of Afghanistan today, one of the least developed skills in the population. Today, you look at the young people, and they're really ahead. But even in those circumstances, even in Korea, you talk just about 2/3 of young people. There's still 1/3 of young people being left out. So that is why the skills agenda is so crucially important. Now, you can see this also clearly here when you look at the evolution of employment in the industrial world. No? If you get great skills, that's where the employment growth comes from. No? Very steeply rising employment. If you have very low skills, actually you keep your job. No? They pay you less and less. No, that's another story. But actually employment has been pretty stable for people with very low skills because someone always delivers the package or drives a car. No? But actually the declining employment is exactly for those who have just so-so skills. No? Keep that in mind. Sort of we have this polarization in the skill use of people that actually matter, at least in terms of employment. What are the skills that are most important? Everybody asks this question. The answer to this is not clear. We're actually not very good in anticipating the evolution of skill demand. We are very, very good in predicting the past, but not very good in analyzing the future on those kinds of questions. And you ask yourself, you know, employers know all of the answers. Actually, they don't either. They're very good in analyzing and predicting what they need today, but actually thinking about the future is a different story. The first thing is your knowledge, obviously, but we need to think about knowledge much more in cross-disciplinary contexts, building knowledge networks. People who are able to sort of think like a scientist and at the same time think like an historian, think like a mathematician, who can actually triangulate different fields of knowledge. Those are the ones who are able to connect the dots where the next innovations will come from. It's about systems thinking. In education, we're very, very good in taking big problems, breaking them into smaller and smaller pieces, and train people to solve those kinds of pieces. But again, you know, innovation is coming from people who can put those pieces together. Design thinking. You are very, very good in this in the community colleges, but that's something still, you know, very, very important today. And design is not just about, you know, innovation is not just about creativity. Creativity is an ingredient of that, obviously. But design is a very systematic process that you can study, that you can learn, and so on. Information literacy, digital literacy, global literacy, all of those things come into actually giving people the tools to manage knowledge and to expand our knowledge. The skills part. There are practical skills, technical skills, but there are also generic skills that are increasingly important. Critical thinking, problem solving, collaboration, social skills. All those kinds of dimensions. And there's a third area I want to highlight. This is sort of harder to talk about, harder sort of to qualify, but this is an area where vocational education, technical career education are so crucially important. And it's about character qualities, as some people call those things. And it's about, you know, resilience, mindfulness, curiosity. This is where you work with real people on real problems, and it makes a huge difference for many people. Courage, leadership, huge opportunity actually for people at the workplace. Work-based learning, those are the tools where you can actually develop many of those kinds of qualities. And you know, you're going to see those are increasingly valued and recognized by employers. So getting that right, anticipating changing demand for skills is so crucially important. Well, the next question is, of course, you know, how you develop those skills. And that's where things get difficult. Obviously, schooling is a big part of this. But you know, I know you're focusing on STEM, but I want to just show you one picture, and that's actually quite disturbing. This is the share of individuals with really, really poor numeracy skills in the age group, you know, 16-29 and 30-54. And you can actually see the United States is sort of very much at the front of that. Many, many young people, you know, do not get, and this is an issue that doesn't come in university or college. This is actually something that we see in schools already. Many people do not have the fundamentals to actually even make it to a community college. Of course, I'm a bit unfair here. I don't show you that actually the United States also has really good skills at the high end of the skill distribution. That's the other part of the story. But there is a huge number of people, you talk about almost a third of young people who lack the most basic foundations in an area that is still your best predictor. If you ask for the single best predictor skills, on earnings, employment, many other things, is numeracy. Huge skills gap on this. Why does it matter? The kind of routine jobs that people all talk about. Your likelihood to be in a routine job is almost directly predicted by your numeracy skills. If you do not have those kinds of fundamental skills, you're actually quite likely to get one of those jobs that is disappearing. If you have great numeracy skills, this is under 5% the likelihood. So those things do matter for people. They have a direct impact on where those people are going to end up later in their lives. And this is an area, STEM, all of this, if we don't build the foundations early in the lives of people, if we give people too many ways out, not to put sufficient emphasis on this, you pay a very, very high price for this, and you can see this clearly in the data. Progress. Singapore is an interesting case. You look at the older generation, the beginning of the bar, and you can see actually they had very poor skills. You look at the young people, they are ahead of anyone else. Even a country like Chile started out on a very, very low end, if you look at the older generation, but comes out. But you go to the United States and you have more or less the young people entering the labor market with a very similar skill distribution as those who leave for retirement. Only the UK comes out where this gap is even smaller. So that is something, ensuring that skill development actually advances as people as new generations are born. The demands on the labor market today are so much higher than they were 2 generations ago. So getting that right is very, very important to ensure that we're not just standing still, but advance. Now I want to come sort of to a really core part of my talk, and that's about how do we move from stacking up qualifications when people are young to actually foster a true culture of lifelong and life-wide learning. Something, many of your community colleges do that. They provide opportunities for people to actually upgrade their skills, continue to learn. But actually, employers and the credentials that are coming out of this are not very good to actually recognize this, and you can see that. But this is the challenge of our times. You can no longer equip people once for their lives. You have to continue to invest in the skills of people, and that's only going to grow as our workplaces change faster and faster. And it starts with this, The US is not doing so badly on this, but in many countries we have, graduates who have a harder and harder time finding a job. And at the very same time, employers say they cannot find the people with the skills they need. That mismatch that is associated with university education is a real, real problem. The country where I live, in France, it's really, really poor kind of match between graduate supply. And you can see that also when you look actually at the relationship between degrees and skills, how hugely this varies. Here you can see basically on the vertical axis the directly measured skill level of young people. And then the colored bubbles are the degrees that people have. And you can actually see, how this varies across countries. You take a Finnish high school graduate, and they can pretty much compare with a college graduate in much of the rest of the world. So actually, degrees are not a very strong currency. They have a high reputational value, and employers often recognize this, but actually when you look at the skills value of degrees, it's very, very patchy. You can see that nicely in the United States. You look at the skills of people and the degrees, associate degrees and university degrees, there actually is a huge overlap. When you look at the earnings of people, these are quite distinct distributions. So we need to become better in our countries to recognize the skills people actually have, rather than degrees and qualifications they once obtained. I'm a good example. I have a physics degree and a physics qualification. Now, that's in my CV. Well, if I go out in the laboratory today, I will not do a good job. A, because physics has advanced so dramatically since I studied, and B, because I probably have lost a lot of the skills that I once had. At the very same time, I have learned new things, like in the field of education, that are nowhere in my CV. And that's basically the problem that we have today. Not being very, very good in recognizing, reading the skills of people and using them. Your current employer is very good at that. They know what you do, and they pay you for this. But once you change your job, you'll find out very, very quickly what your generic skills are and what they are not. So this picture is really a good illustration that we attribute still far too much value to formal qualifications, and the skills actually are often not associated with this. Getting employers involved, that is so crucially important. I want to show you this on one example. This shows you on the vertical axis the skills of people, and on the horizontal axis the age. Now this is about young people, 16 or 25 years. If you are in education, you go to college or anything, this is the red line, slopes upward. So you are in education, you learn something. If you combine education and work, that's the green bar. You start out lower, and that's because that's typically not people's first choice. Vocational education sounds always not as good as academic education. Start out lower. But you look at the end point, and you can see these people have acquired the same skills. Even young people who are just in work, still exists, people who drop out, you can see actually if they are in work, they learn something. The only people who are in trouble are the people in the yellow line, the people who are not in work, employment and not in education. They end up worse than where they started. We lose skills that we don't use. But this tells us something about how important it is to actually combine employment and study in a way that is reinforcing. And there are several things that we really have learned to integrate the world of work with the world of education that used to be quite distinct. The first is, making sure that that employers are really a central part in the agenda. Thinking about the curricula, the plans, the work organization, providing work-based learning. If I could do anything mandatory in the world, in universities or anywhere, it would be work-based learning. We have actually very, very good elements. That's the defining element that actually raises the skills of people. Hard to do for small and medium-sized enterprises. Now, that's a clearly acknowledged story, but there are very, very good solutions to this. If you go to Norway, for example, you have firms who work together to promote apprenticeships. They can't do it each on their own, but they work together to do that. If you go to Switzerland, they actually share their apprentices. You go around, you learn to work in several firms, and they teach you different things. So there are actually really interesting ways of how to work on this. I talked already about the importance to integrate work-based learning systematically into technical and career education. And it's best if it's systematic, it's best if it's mandatory, it's important that it's credit-bearing, and it's also important that it's really quality assured, that what happens in the workplace actually fulfills some important criteria. Learning from employers, what skills are valued, content of curriculum, a very, very good source of information on this. And last but not least, building adequate transversal skills into this. And not just make this occupational specific, but making sure that people acquire those foundation skills that help them to grow. And that's, again, where the partnership between community colleges, learning in institutions is so important, because that's where you can acquire those kinds of skills best. And getting that right is really the guarantee to do this. So in sum, it's about provisions that match labor market needs, having a good level of sensitivity for how actually, where skills are required, responding to this. It's about, great delivery, making sure that the quality of those learning environments are really up to scratch. And it's about reliable competency-based qualifications. And this is probably the single biggest barrier for actually further expansion of the sector. And if we are not able to recognize the skills that people get, it's very, very hard to motivate people to actually invest their time and their effort and maybe their money in obtaining those kinds of degrees and qualifications. So getting employers on board, very, very important. The eternal question is always, who should pay for the whole thing? Who pays and who benefits? And the one thing that we actually see is that we typically underestimate the returns to skill investment. For individuals, that's the easiest part. You can see actually there's nothing you can invest your money no better than in your own skills. No? Tertiary qualifications, typically per individual, you talk about 400,000 US dollars, one of the countries with the highest returns on skills. That doesn't tell you that the skills are better, but it's simply that the labor market is very, very good in extracting value from the skills of people. No? But what's interesting is also that the green bar is very long, and that's something people often don't see. No? People say, you can't afford, free higher education, free college education, free community colleges. But in fact, the reality is that taxpayers make, over $100,000 profit from everybody who gets a qualification, because those people pay more taxes. It's actually quite simple to understand, but often not really recognized. So actually the economics of upgrading skills are good and rising. Those kinds of bars have got a lot longer over the last years. And that's one of the most interesting findings about the knowledge economy. No? We have not seen a depreciation of the labor market value of skills. No? Some people say, well, if everybody gets a great qualification, then, we all get the minimum wage at the end. No? And there's nothing that would support that. No? Across the OECD, the industrialized countries, we have actually seen rising numbers of people with better skills, and yet demand outpacing supply. So that's very, very important. Of course, it's not just about getting a degree, and this is where the STEM area comes from. It absolutely matters where you study. For example, if you are in the United States, education, the field I'm working on, is not a good choice. No? Actually, in relative terms, the red dot is very low. Science and engineering, manufacturing, construction, those are the choices where rewards are very high. So, it's not just about getting a degree, but actually choosing the field of study that actually rewards you appropriately. So this is very, very important. In some countries, if you go to the right end of the spectrum, those differentials are not very high. No? But if you're in the United States, you better choose your study carefully, because it really matters in terms of your earnings and employment later on. So this is a story about, getting the right skills developed. But I want to talk briefly about the next part of the story, and that's basically making sure that we actually make good use out of this. There are, even in the United States, people who do not go to work, who do not use their skills, who do not get a job that's using their skills effectively. Very, very important to figure out, why this is happening and how we can actually overcome this. Creating incentives that make it pay to work is important, but there are also many non-financial barriers. Things that have to do, people actually, if you think about a low skills equilibrium, this is sort of an area where people have poor skills and there are employers who are trying to make a lot of money with low skills. Those equilibria are actually quite stable. Moving up the value chain is far from an automatic process, and that's one of the biggest traps for young people. And if you tell them, actually, this is the only employer in town, why should you go to study? This is something that we should think much, much harder. And that brings me to the last part, actually putting skills to effective use. The first thing that often is a challenge is actually to figure out the skills that people have and the skills that are actually needed. No? If you have fantastic skills and nobody knows about it, not good for you, not good for anybody. No? And again, this is part of the problem, part of the story of community colleges. Now, the skills that are developed, you do 2-3 courses, you get a great kind of education, you learn a lot of things, but actually, it's very, very hard to make those things explicit. No? Let me show you some data on this. This is the share of people who are, in terms of degrees, overqualified in green. Now they have qualifications they would actually not need for their job, and underqualified in red. You look at this chart, in most countries you can think, actually, we wouldn't need so many people with degrees. No? But that's a very superficial picture. When you actually look at over and under skilling, do you actually have better skills than what you need at your job? The picture looks very, very different. You take the United States, you find less than 1 in 10 employee who's actually better skilled than what they need for their current job. The surplus layer of skills is actually very, very thin. And that's true in virtually most of the countries. You wish this green bar would be a lot longer, because what you want is people who reinvent their job, who drive this economy forward. But we have pretty much run out of that kind of surplus. If you think back to the 1950s, the Japanese tended to put college graduates in car factories, and everybody was laughing about them, these overqualified people in the car factory. Well, they invented the most productive car industry. People inventing their jobs. Now, that was true in the past. Today, basically, there are very few people who actually have more skills than what they actually need. So the picture that you often read in the newspapers about overqualification has actually very, very little to do with the reality as soon as you test the skills that people actually have. So keep that in mind. Here's a kind of nice way of analyzing this. If you are in the green line, it means you have great skills and you use those skills. We call this a high skills match situation. You get out of a community college, you get sort of an IT, high-tech kind of qualification, you get a job, they pay you very well at the beginning of your working life, and you keep to grow in your earnings. If you have a skills deficit, and by this I mean you have a great job, but you actually are not yet quite up to it. You start out lower, because your employer is not going to pay you for things you don't know. But actually, it's good for you. You keep growing. A great job is going to pull you up because you're going to continue to invest in skills and learn and things like this. If you have a skills surplus, now that's the orange line, the story is different. You have more skills than what's actually needed, and you're going to see a decline over your life cycle in real terms. And that is important because, in employment, we are very, very good in protecting the kind of jobs that are actually least productive. Now, nobody wants to close a big factory, but actually, this is important to keep in mind. So skill match has consequences for people. Now, getting people to the right jobs, giving people the right skills has very, very important consequences. Making sure that young people have a great start. Crucially important. Remember, from the very beginning, skills that you do not use, you actually lose. Very important message. Making skills more transparent. I think this is, again, I highlight this now multiple times. In my view, it's the biggest challenge in the community colleges in the United States. Now, this is an area where Europe is doing better. You learn something, you recognize it, you get accredited for it, and you can carry that skill. You can go to study somewhere else or work somewhere else. Helping employers to make better use of employee skills. This is actually an area where the United States comes out very strongly. I contrast here the United States and Japan. In the first part of my presentation, I showed you how highly skilled the Japanese are. And it's true. But when it comes actually to using the skills, they do really poorly, particularly when it comes to things like problem solving that I made so important. The Japanese labor market is rigid, siloed, women are excluded from many occupations, and they pay a huge price for this. So their talent actually doesn't serve them well. In the United States, you have the opposite picture. Actually, the biggest challenge here is the talent pipeline. Too many people are left out. But those who have the right skills actually have the highest skill utilization. The labor market here is very, very responsive to the skills of people. That's a great part of the story. But honestly, I would prefer to have the Japanese problem than the American one, because if they fix the labor market, they can see huge rises in productivity, whereas, improving the talent pipeline is a long struggle. And I think this is not just to do with, the young people in school today, but creating the opportunities for lifelong and life-wide learning that are going to be crucially important. Gender gap. That's also really interesting. When you look at the relationship on the vertical axis, I show you the gender gap in wages, and on the horizontal axis, the differences in skill use. Men and women are basically equally skilled. Choices vary, but when you basically just test the skills, and so they come out equally well. Why do women earn less? A lot has to do with skill use, particularly in the STEM areas. Choice of subjects, once you account for industry, occupation, and proficiency, you actually find nothing left. So this is not that employers are unfair or so. That may be a little part of the story, but the big part of the story really is, what you study, how you work, and how you use your skills in your workplace, and a big part of the gender gap. Creating more high-value added jobs. There are some really important success stories around the world. You can see them very clearly in East Asia these days, helping local economies move up the value chain, fostering more entrepreneurship, and educating people to create a job, not educating people for a job. They're very important today. So those areas, putting skills to an effective use, I think we've often neglected that, but it's a crucial part of the productivity puzzle. So, in sum, success has to do with high-quality initial education and training, building the foundations. And I mean, honestly, what isn't done well in school is very, very hard to fix. Those people that go to your institutions are the people at the high end of the skill distribution. Those who need that education most are least likely to take part in virtually any form of adult learning. Very, very important part of this. Making learning everybody's business, institutions, employers, getting everybody to the table. Where that really works well, you have very, very low rates of dropout. Having effective links between education and work, very clear story, I said enough about that. Making sure that people can, adapt learning to their lives rather than the other way around. Making sure Sweden and Finland are doing really well on this. It's people who decide when they learn, where they learn, how they learn, what they learn, and they can build, their college degrees, even, their over long periods of time while they work and study. I think this is something where I think most of our societies have still to grow a lot on this. Improving transparency, once again, easy to find information about where you can learn, what those qualifications are worth. We're not very, very good in telling young people the truth about labor market prospects. Universities don't have often the kind of incentives to tell people, well, actually, this is the labor market outcomes. The information systems in most countries are relatively weak. Guidance. This is about bringing work experiences early into the lives of people. Making sure that even smaller children actually understand the world of work, the kind of opportunities that is. If you want people to study science, later in their lives, they need the kind of experiences very early on in their lives, what science really is, to get a feel for that. And often, we make that so abstract. Every fourth grader is enthusiastic about STEM. You don't have to worry about the fourth graders or the third graders. At age 15, when they are in our PISA group, when we do those comparisons, we have made it a misery for a lot of those people, and we are not winning them back later in their lives. So I think this is a really important part of this story. Helping employers make good use out of the skills of people, helping economies move up the value chain. I want to leave you with sort of 3 challenges that are really, really tough to manage. I'm going to skip that. 3 challenges that are really important. When you basically look at, sort of priorities. Where do you invest? This is the hardest choice. Some people say, well, early childhood education is the most important investment you can make in life. True. At the very same time, you have a lot of people out in the workplace, who need upgrading of skills. True. How do you actually prioritize those kinds of investments now? Where do you invest in the learning of people? Combining short-term and long-term considerations. Once again, employers are very good in telling you what you need today. Who tells you actually what you're going to need tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, as an individual, as a country, to remain competitive? Getting that balance right is crucially important. It's making balanced investments in the job-specific skills of people, and at the very same time, the long-term generic skills that help people to keep growing. Very, very important kind of choices. My country, Germany, is a good example. Technical education is really well developed. You have young people at the age of 16, and you give them the choice, you go to academic studies and later on to universities. It takes you many years. Maybe you earn a lot of money. Or, you go to work with BMW. It's going to be a great place of learning. You work with real people. Everything is fantastic. So the majority of people choose the latter. Very few people go to university, even though the government pays for everything. They like that kind of work-based learning. They have a great job, good salary early in their lives. But actually, those lines cross at the age of 45 and 50. not having the kind of foundation skills early in your life, you pay for that at one stage. And getting that balance right is very, very far from trivial, but very, very important. The life cycle perspective. No? You think about community colleges, still a story for young people, largely, but increasingly so. We need to think harder about how we upgrade skills. And this is the probably most depressing chart that I show you. No? It shows you on the vertical axis the skills of people, and on the horizontal axis the age. No? And you find out very quickly why this is so depressing when you figure out where you are on this chart. No? But the true part is really that we are doing quite fine, cramming a lot of knowledge into young people. But as people evolve, we're not longer making this investment. And this is not to do with older generations not being well educated. Surely not for the United States. I mentioned already, the older generations is as well educated as the younger one. It has to do with kind of the way in which we use our skills. So making learning much more a lifelong, life-wide process is crucially important. Making this a whole-of-government approach, bringing together, the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Labor, all the players who deal with the lives of people, very, very important. Getting the stakeholders involved. Again, making learning everybody's business is crucially important. Those 4 challenges are really at the heart of, many of the issues that we face today. But again, our data also show that dramatic progress is possible. If you look at this on a global scale, where we are today and where we were 10 years ago in terms of the talent that is currently available is not enough. The demand for talent is still growing faster than supply. That's why we are seeing this polarization in wages. But again, that is something we have to continue to invest in. That's all I wanted to share with you. Thank you very much. Yes, that's on. Yeah.
Hello. Hi. You mentioned you're from Germany and you live in France. How do you define the community college in Europe? What are they called in Europe?
It's a good question, actually. There is a different term that is used in different countries. Most of this is called career education. The international standard classification of education has a level that is being used in Europe, but the terms each country uses can be very, very different. It's in some cases provided by universities, but in most cases actually provided in institutions quite similar to your community college. The difference between Europe and the United States is that the emphasis on work-based learning would typically be stronger in Europe. So you'd spend one-third, sometimes two-thirds of your time actually learning at the workplace, which is quite different from your community college. But
would I be wrong to assume that in Europe, community colleges or equivalents are valued a lot more than they are valued here?
Yeah, you can see this in several fronts. First of all, the share of young people choosing that route it would be much larger than in the United States, but you also see that in the career and earnings prospects of people. Those kinds of qualifications coming out of this tend to be highly valued in the workplace, both in terms of earnings, but also in the chances of people moving up in employment. And this is something actually, in my view, that is a quick win for the United States. Now, building a strong national qualification framework in which those skills are actually mapped and recognized. I don't think that's very, very hard to do. Australia has done that recently. The UK is working on that. They came from a very similar situation like the United States, and that's actually something, that could get you a long way on that journey.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening. When you were talking about the apprenticeship model that's used in Europe, how is that scaled as far as the person working as an apprentice? What is their typical day? What would be their salary? How would they be working in that position there in Europe?
It varies a lot across countries. In my country, in Germany, and Switzerland, and Austria, they have a system where the kind of work-based component is very, very strong. You would typically only spend about 2 days per week in a school environment and the rest working in the company. But even the company would provide a lot of, particularly large companies, a lot of training, and sort of real sort of productive work is actually quite limited for apprentices, particularly when they're young. That varies by country. If you go to Italy, if you go to France as an apprentice, you would basically be very much immersed in the production process and so on. So it means something quite different. But the idea to combine learning and work, that's the common denominator of apprentice programs.
So as an apprentice, can they make, are they making a living wage?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. They get paid as an apprentice. That's basically, they get a wage that is equivalent to their contribution to productivity, and you can live from that, actually. That's what makes it quite attractive to many young people. You actually earn quickly a good wage. The transition to employment is also typically good. One of the reasons, people always ask, what makes this attractive for employers? Why would you train people that then may leave and work for other employers? The reason employers do this is primarily non-monetary, of a non-monetary nature. You basically increase the bonding, you find out who the right people are for your company, and so on. That's where sort of a lot of the value is created.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. As people are working longer, don't you think it's a good idea for the people that are mid-level age to retool them as far as learning the skills? Because you were saying things about being overeducated, but in technology, we're undereducated at the same time.
You're absolutely right. I think this is the most fundamental challenge that most of our societies face, filling the skills gap in the middle age and the older ages. However, it's not easy to do. There are several barriers that you need to address. One is, the opportunity cost get much, much higher. When you are later in your life, how do you actually finance this? And this is where, governments having kind of good funding systems, bridging those kinds of risks, thinking about the longer-term returns, fiscal and individual, rather than just the cost. You need very, very good structures for lifelong and life-wide learning. The countries I mentioned, countries like Sweden are very, very good at this. You have about 40% of the older or the middle-aged workforce actually involved in learning and training. Because employers support it, you can actually reduce your working time. Individuals are willing to invest because they know that's going to get them a better job. And governments provide the kind of financing that actually makes it possible. So it's very important, but there are several kind of challenges that you need to address to make it a reality. The other part I also want to mention is, giving people a positive experience of learning. One of the things that we often see is that the people who need that kind of continued development most will not do it because they were disappointed in school. School didn't work for them when they were young, so it's the last place they want to go back. Employers also, they are unlikely to invest in people, where the returns are likely to be least. So you really need to have a very strong system to support it.
I was wondering about, I'm not sure this is on, you have companies like BMW, Mercedes, etc., who are very active in the European, I would assume the internships, etc. And then coming over to the United States and having companies here, or I should say manufacturing facilities here, do they employ those same skills? Or the same methodology of giving the internships and that sort of thing? Or do they kind of abandon that when they come here expecting everybody has those skills?
Well, actually, it's a good question. And in part, actually, those models have been exported with the companies. I know that well in Mexico. I know that well in China. I'm not so familiar in the United States. But often, actually, those companies have seen the merits of doing this. You often talk to companies in the United States and they will say, well, give me your workers factory ready. But actually, those companies that have a culture of apprenticeship do see the value and they tend to export that. Thank you very much.
So Dave and I get to tell you that the exhibit hall is open. Everyone who's been here before knows that that's a really important thing, to go and see what everyone has put together for you and network. And also there's always great food. You're probably hungry, right?
Yes, very good.
Yeah.
I'll be there.
So for those of you who are new awardees, I'd also like to welcome all of you and follow the people that are moving towards the exhibit hall. You'll get there and you'll really enjoy it.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.